So thanks everybody for joining us today. For those who don't know me, my name is Mark. Professionally, I'm a lifestyle financial planner. I typically work with women in finance, helping them identify, achieve, and maintain the lifestyle that they want without the fear of ever running out of money. Personally, I'm married to my beautiful wife, Nicole. I'm a father to two amazing children, Luke and Sephora, and my family really are the purpose and the reason that I do what I do every day. And we personally are on our journey to living our best lives together. This is also the work that I do with my clients, and I feel really blessed that I get to have an impact and help them to live their best life. Today, we're doing things a little bit differently. Ben and I are going to be having a conversation around the true cost of having and raising kids in South Africa. Ben is also a qualified CFP, and he's going to be joining me on the conversation. Professionally, Ben focuses predominantly on serving doctors. He's a father. Well, he's a father to be, but he is a father to his father is a doctor. Sorry, his sister's a doctor. His wife's a doctor. A little bit more than a doctor. She's on her way to being a neurosurgeon. So, given all the doctors in his life, he's built a practice around serving doctors. He understands their journey. And really helping them across the spectrum from varsity all the way through to specialization. So Ben is married, as I mentioned, to the brain surgeon, Manono, and they have a baby planned, right? It's coming up, as Ben calls it, an evacuation plan around the 9th to 10th of March, otherwise for the normal people known as a cesarean. So that will be coming up soon, and we'll chat around the costs of that, Ben. But they live in KZN. They've recently moved into a new home, fit for a family. Another unintended cost of having kids. But yeah, they're really looking forward to this stage of life. Just some quick housekeeping, keeping things very informal, even more informal than normal today. It's just a chat between Ben and I on the cost of having kids. So if you want to join in, have any questions, please feel free to do so via the Q&A function, which we'll address during the presentation and if necessary at the end. As I've mentioned, it's just a conversation between Ben and I, two lifestyle financial planners, and basically two dads, or a dad and a dad to be, and we'd love for you guys to join us. We'll keep the conversation prompt to 45 minutes roughly, so that we don't take up any more of your precious time. So before we get started and before we start with the poll, I just want to put a little caveat out there because, just in our little friendly chats, it seems that I'm fear-mongering people into not having kids, but that's not the purpose of today. I've got two kids and I love them very much. But, we just want to shed some light as to what to expect when having kids and along the journey. So before having kids to the different stages, just so that you can put yourself in the best financial position possible along the journey. Having kids is stressful as it is. And if we can help you remove some of that financial anxiety by planning along the way, it just allows you to be more present and enjoy the journey and the time without having to worry about the financial stresses. So that being said, we just have to open up with the poll. Where are you in your parenting journey? So where would I fit, right? So I'm still not thinking. We're kind of toddler stage.
I'm sort of stuck between thinking things through and newborn.
Is it not too late to think things through, Ben?
I suppose so. Hey? I think I have to click newborn, even though they're not here yet.
So where are you, Ben? Right? We sort of touched on it, but actually, where are you in the journey?
Well, little Peanut is due on the 16th of March. But the doctor has told us it's quite a big baby, and so we might, if it doesn't come naturally, we might have a look at having a C-section and doing that a week earlier, so like maybe around about the 9th of March. So that means maybe in 2 weeks' time I might be, well, I am a dad, I guess, technically already, but I'll be able to meet my little boy or little girl, whatever it is.
Have you guys not chosen to know the sex?
Yeah, we thought, it's best to, in this world there's so many little surprises, and we thought we would keep that a secret, and I just thought it'd be nice for me it'd just be something special when the baby comes out. I can look and see what it is and then tell my wife, it's a boy or it's a girl. And people all think we're a bit crazy, but what's been quite nice about it is that every time she thinks it's a boy and I think it's a girl. So every time it's like kicking, she's like, oh, your boy's playing soccer and your boy's doing this and that and that. And then I'll be like, oh man, I'm sure she's just practicing her ballet and or maybe she's doing this or that. And so it's quite nice. It just kind of keeps it alive, the anticipation, instead of just knowing, we wouldn't have that sort of fun, argument.
Yeah, it's a bit of a bonding experience that you guys are going through at the moment. But the planner in me says, oh my gosh, what are you doing? Are you buying pink? Are you buying blue? Are you buying gray? What are you doing in that regard?
Well, a lot of people that's a big thing. Everyone's like, oh, but what are you doing about their room? Are you painting it pink or blue? And I was like, well, if the first one's a boy and I paint it blue and the second one is a girl, am I going to then repaint the whole room, pink or whatever? So, you can get some great neutral colors. And then in terms of clothes, it's funny, we've been donated a whole bunch of girls' clothes in case it's a girl, and if it's not, then we can just pass them on. But the other thing again is, you can obviously get a few neutral stuff, but then kids grow up quick from what I'm told. So they only last in those clothes for a few months, and then you're buying a next batch anyway. So when it comes, you can sort of start buying.
So you don't mind if your daughter's running around in blues and things. That doesn't really matter, right? I'm just joking. It's saying it tongue in cheek. Should we have a look at those poll results? Okay, so quite evenly spread. It's only 11% that are still thinking things through, so we can't have too much impact scaring them away. But I suppose majority are newborn and toddler stage, and some teenagers stuck. Not sure the advice we can give you there apart from saving, but I think let's sort of jump into it. So if we start right at the beginning, pre-baby, Ben, maybe this is I know what I went through, but this is very recent for you, right? So what are some of the things to sort of think about, and where do you actually start pre-baby?
So I think most people probably are already, but it would always be good to be on medical aid. You want to get onto medical aid as soon as possible. A lot of medical aids will have a 9-month or a 1-year waiting period, especially for pregnancy. So if you find out you're pregnant and try joining medical aid, then it's all going to be excluded, and that can become quite a cost. And then to add on to that would be your gap cover. Again, gap cover will also have potentially a 12-month or 9-month waiting period, again, to stop people finding out they're pregnant and then trying to quickly hop onto the bandwagon, because I know there's going to be a whole bunch of expenses there. So it's really important to make sure, if you're thinking about and you're planning to have a child, to start off with getting onto medical aid and gap cover.
Okay, so medical aid for me is kind of a given. I think living in South Africa, you almost have to have medical aid. It's kind of like sending your kids to a private school, which we'll get to, but so medical aid. And then I think importantly, and something that the mistake that I made was I wasn't on gap cover because I didn't, realize that there would be a gap, right? You think you're having a baby and everything is covered from a hospital perspective, but there are a whole bunch of potential co-payments that you're in for if you aren't on the highest plan, or you select a hospital that's potentially out of your network, or something that you and I have chatted about before, Ben, given your history with doctors, but medical aid rates, right? Doctors charge multiple percentages of medical aid rates, or as you actually told me once before, it's because the hospitals or the medical aids set the rate so low that it seems like the doctors are charging multiples, and then we, have things to say about the doctors, but it's actually the medical aid. So the thing is, if you don't have a gap cover, you're in for co-payments, right? So co-payments on your hospital administration, as well as, what are the other co-payments that you guys have looked at?
Yeah, I mean, even going to go see so obviously now when you find out that you're pregnant, you're going to go, then you go for your first sort of scan or checkup with the gynae. I mean, that's a big cost. Often they say the first visit, and like I say, that's over and above a medical aid rate. So there could be potential co-payment. And then along the journey, there's a whole bunch of things. There'll be things like blood tests that you've got to go for, which could or could not be covered. And then the other big one is scans. And also depends on your doctor. They might do it in their rooms, but they might send you to specialists for specialist scans. Again, those not generally always covered in medical aid. So then that's got to be an extra cost that can come out. And yeah, I mean, if you got a normal pregnancy, that's kind of it. But I mean, as well, there could be some other things that pop up along the way that you're unaware of, and that's can get quite costly.
Yeah, so I think gap cover, is imperative. Things like your gynae, there's going to be a co-payment there. The anaesthetist, the hospital, the epidural, I think you mentioned to me before. These are all things that we think our medical aid will cover, but don't. If you've got gap cover, they will. And the gap cover is relatively inexpensive when you compare it to how these co-payments could start stacking up. I remember when we had Luke, our co-payment just at the hospital was I think 10,000 rand. Gap cover costs 350 rand a month. So you're definitely getting your money's worth in that regard. And then Ben, so you touched on something. So pre-baby, it was a little bit different for you and I, but our gynae recommended monthly visits, right? So every month you're going to the gynae and you're doing scans in the hospital, and then you've got, I think, 2 of the big scans, 12-week and 18-week, just to make sure everything is going according to plan. But those were costs that we had to incur ourselves, right? So we didn't have a medical savings account, which it would have come from in that event. So it's not a covered expense. It's going to come from your savings account, but that's around 1,000 to 1,500 rand a scan. Right. So from a monthly perspective, before you've even had the baby, you're looking at least 1,500 rand a month just to cover your scan bills, right?
Yeah. I've got friends who've had twins, and they were recommended to go see like the super specialist, and just that scan, just because they were having twins, was 5 grand. Came away from it saying it was a bit of a waste of time. But I mean, obviously, if there was no when everything's fine, I guess thinking about paying 5 grand, it's a lot of money. And so I think all these scans can add up and cost quite a bit.
Yeah. So there's a monthly amount, which I would say ranges pre-baby maybe 1,000 to 2,000 rand a month. But then there's some other bigger expenses which come into play, and that's kind of the setting up the nursery, right, and everything that goes with that. You mentioned painting the room, but there's a baby room, and in a baby room you need if you want your partner or your wife to love you, you need a chair for them, a baby chair, rocking chair, but you need a cot. You need a changing station. There's a whole bunch of furniture that you actually need.
Just I have to go get all that stuff now.
Yeah, Ben, you're 2 weeks away. What are you talking about?
Yeah, and Mark, and also like what you alluded to a little bit earlier on, thinking about, we as well, knew we were on this journey. We used to live in a smaller place. We, again, first of all, thought about buying a house. We want to build, raise our child somewhere. What area are we looking at? So that was a cost as well. I guess also pre-baby, it was moving and having the space for our baby, and then with coming to there's like, I guess, the nursery, if you want to call it like that. I mean, sure, I don't think there's a limit on how much can be spent in there. I mean, you can go absolutely wild with decorations and that kind of thing. One thing it's a tough one, because we always want the best for our children, and so we think we got to go buy everything brand new. But my top tip, I guess, is look on Facebook Marketplace. I mean, you can get some really great stuff at a fraction of the price, and as new. I mean, a cot is not going to be used for that long. You can't really damage it that much as a baby. You can get a really great cot for a fraction of the price. I think you had a similar story when you moved down to Cape Town.
Yeah, so I think what we're trying to look at is, so pre-baby, there's monthly expenses. We've chatted through some of those, but then there are these one-off lump sum expenses. And it's the baby's room, right? And like you said, you can do that. You can go as wild as you want, but there's some basics that you need to buy, and you can buy them on Facebook Marketplace. It's pre-loved. It's like everybody loves their baby stuff, so you're not going to get it in bad condition, and it's going to cost you a fraction of the price. But then there's also the pram setup, right? The travel system, which and we got caught the first time in that whole world, right? It almost becomes like a statement that you're pushing your kid around in what brand name pram you have, but then it's the pram, and it's the car chair, and it's the stage 1 car chair, and the stage 2 car chair. And do you have an ISOFIX base, or are you just going to use a seat belt? Like, what is easier? What's more convenient? And we landed up getting this whole system that cost more than my first car actually cost, right? And yes, it lasted till we moved to Cape Town, because we weren't going to have any more children when we moved to Cape Town. So we sold it, right, on Facebook Marketplace, and we sold it for a fraction of the cost, less than half of what we actually paid for it, because that's just what the going rate is. Luckily, when we got to Cape Town and we were blessed with the news of our daughter, we were able to do the same thing, right? So having gone through it, we went to Marketplace, and we were able to find basically the same system that we had sold for even cheaper than what we had sold it for, and it was in great condition. So we paid a third of what I originally paid for Luke's system for one that was basically in the same condition. And I think it was all me, right? I didn't care the second time around if it was brand new or not. And I think it's a tough one, because like you said, we want to give our kids the best, right? But a pram, do you need the 20,000 rand, or will that same system but at 8,000 rand or whatever sort of be okay? So I think we need to wrap up this pre-baby start, Ben. But one of the points, so from a financial perspective, I think you're probably looking at around 20 to 50,000 rand as a lump sum, right, pre-baby, in order to equip everything. And then you're looking at around 1,000 to 2,000 rand a month. So that's the fixed expense, right? That's the first expense that's coming with you for forever, for the rest of your life. We've added 2,000 rand onto your budget. But something you mentioned, which is quite prevalent in your life at the moment during the stages, is understanding your maternity leave and the policy at work, Ben.
Yeah, so we're very fortunate that so like as you mentioned, my wife is a doctor, so she will get paid her base salary. So the reason why I say base is because built into her salary, normally she gets paid overtime. That's a fixed overtime amount. So she will get paid her fixed salary for 4 months, which is while she's on maternity leave. So it's still going to be a drop in, quite a substantial drop in income during this time. So we have to budget for that as well. We have to think of, we're not getting what we used to. But there are also then other places they might not pay the full amount, or they pay a certain amount, and then you got to claim from UIF. And remember, the thing with UIF is that you're going to only get a lump sum at the end of the time. So when you're claiming, so you've gone off for maternity for 4 months, you're going back to work, now you got to try and queue up in the queue somewhere, and that's another day. Maybe you got to take a day of leave to go do that, hand in all your forms, make sure all the right forms are there. There isn't a form missing, because then it starts all over again. And that takes some time to process, and then they'll back pay you, for that. So it's really important that you understand at work, how will you get paid? Will you get paid? How does that work while you're off, and how long can you be off for?
Yeah. So I don't know if it's legislated, but there is in South Africa, we have legislation around maternity leave. I think the debate is whether it's paid or unpaid, but I think you get at least 4 months off. something to consider then is 4 months enough, right? Do you want more? Because if you want more, you can potentially use your sick leave. If you've got sick leave, not sick leave, sorry, your annual leave, you're going to need the sick leave for other things. So annual leave, which you could stack onto the 4 months. But this leads us into the next phase is what happens then, right? So let's say 4 months, 5 months, potentially reduced pay, like you mentioned. So not only have you got increased expenses, that you potentially got reduced pay. Let's assume you've got the same pay, but now what, right? So the 4 to 6 month period comes, your baby's born, you're out of the newborn-ish stage. What have you guys thought about that comes next, Ben?
I think it's also difficult. There's always, I guess, the planning stage, what you think, like this is what we're going to do. And then when reality comes, there's also a different, what happens in, because it's very easy for us to even talk about and say, oh, Manona's going to go back to work. But, there could be like this hectic bonding session and what happens then. Those are things that we're going to have to talk about. But as it stands, Manona's going to go back to work because she is in a registrar program, so she is in the process of specializing, so she kind of has to go back to work. So we don't really have a choice for us in our circumstances. And then the question is, well, then what happens with Peanut? Because I've also got a job, right? I'm also working. So then what happens? So what we are looking at doing is we're fortunate we got a family member who we can get to come in, and we will sort of be a nanny. But again, that's another cost that we have to bring in to our budget. But for us, it's the cost of, is it cheaper to bring in a nanny or for one of us to stay at home, right? And that's what we have to weigh up. But that's the financial cost, but there's also, there is an emotional cost as well, because now somebody else is looking after your baby all day. When you get home from work, you're tired, you see the baby, feed it, go to bed, you're missing out on a lot of on your child's life. That's also quite a difficult thing to work through.
Yeah, I think those are some of the trade-offs that you're touching on there. But I think importantly, you're saying is if you're going to go back to work, if you're both going to be full-time employees or working full-time, somebody else has got to step in to help, right? And then you're fortunate in that there's a family member. It clearly comes at a cost still. But if there's no family member, that's a full-time nanny carer position, right? Which is at least 5,000 rand plus a month, right? If you've got somebody, given that you guys work full-time.
I'm saying that there's a big emotional stress as well, trying to find that person. It's not easy. There's someone that you're going to care, or basically entrusting your child with to look after, to keep alive. I've spoken to a few other parents. I mean, they've gone to 3-4 nannies in the space of 2, 3, 4 months. It's a nanny a month because they haven't found the right person. So just not financially as well. There's a lot of other, I'd say, factors that you got to factor into it as well. Like I say, we were fortunate. It's hard to find.
There's a nanny, right? Yes, there's a nanny. From a planning perspective, there's a cost associated with a nanny, but actually finding a nanny isn't easy. And I know there's a whole bunch of agencies that have popped up to try and solve this exact problem. We went to an agency when we had Luke, but it doesn't, like you said, it's not a guaranteed solution, right? And then there's a cost. You pay initially, and you pay to the service, who then provides a nanny, and I think you've got a trial period. But every time you're replacing, it's a stressful time, right? So at least if you can budget accordingly and know that the finances are set aside for a nanny, you can just remove some of the financial anxiety, so you can try and work through all the other anxieties that are going on in finding a nanny and replacing a nanny, and having the person, leaving your child with this person all day. But yeah, I think that's a fixed expense. Something also during this stage that we spoke about, Ben, is adding the new baby onto your medical aid, right?
And that's normally a big cost, right?
Found out what that looks like, what it's going to cost you guys.
I think I've been a bit too scared to have a look, to be honest, Mark.
Exactly why we're having this chat today, Ben, so that people don't hide and stick their head in the sand. It's the thing, right? You're going to incur the cost, right?
Yeah, I think for me, it's something that it's given, like you said at the beginning, it's got to go on, and so we're going to have to make a way no matter what, because that baby's got to go onto medical aid. There's going to be lots of follow-up visits with the doctor after they're born as well. And often they get a bit sniffly and this and that. So there's going to be more doctor's visits. So yeah, we're going to have to add it onto the medical aid, which will be a line
baby's
item.
definitely going onto the medical aid. I would assume 1,000 rand a month extra on there. So you're carrying 2,000 rand from pre-baby that's through, another 1,000 rand, so you have 3,000 rand extra a month. And then, like you mentioned, right there are milestones that you have to take your baby to the doctor for, right? So there are vaccinations that they have to do, and those are quite a lot of those early on. And maybe just a little tip there is, you can get, the government is obliged to supply vaccinations to our children, just like they're obliged to supply electricity, but they don't.
Just on that, just check with your medical aid as well. Some of them offer, like, as well, if you register that you are pregnant, and during the time they're quite good at sending out a whole bunch of emails, like where you should be, this month. They send out. We've had a laugh because they've sent an email saying this week you should be like a little cantaloupe. This week you should be a watermelon, and we're like, sheesh.
Yeah.
But one of the other good things, they do often send out some perks, I guess, is that so you can choose from. And like one of the options is you could have someone come and do a vaccination, at your house, or you could have there's other things like meals or gift bags and stuff. But what I'm trying to say is that use your medical aid, like find out exactly what you have on offer as well, because there are some little extra things that are not, I would say, they're not great advertised a lot, because it's something that they're giving away for free. But if you can make use of that as much as you can.
Yeah, I think it's finding out. It's contacting the medical aid. You've got to let them know that you're pregnant. A lot of them have these. I know, like with Discovery, there's Vitality Baby, and then this whole program kicks in, like you've mentioned. But something we didn't know the first time is you can have the nurse, like you say, after the pregnancy come to the house and do all the things, right? So check the breastfeeding if you go that route, and check the weight and the weigh and on vaccinations, and that's for free, as opposed to having to take mom and new baby to the clinic or whatever it is. So yeah, check on those things. But importantly, on the vaccinations, you get a government supply and you get a private supply. The government supply is free. You just pay for the administration of that. The private supply is, as things are in South Africa, it's privatized because there's not normally sufficient government supply, but you're paying a premium pricing, right? So you've got your big pharmaceutical companies who are producing the stuff, and you're paying a premium for that. So during this stage, Ben, something that I'm not sure if you guys have had the discussion or what you're looking at, but there's formula versus breastfeeding, right? One is natural and costs nothing except emotionally, and the other is extremely expensive, right? You don't really get a choice. I think it's the situation, but that is a big consideration. If formula comes into your budget, there's at least another 1,000 rand a month during this stage, right?
Yeah, I mean, like you say, it's not something we can't choose yet, or it's something that we can really choose. I suppose you can choose formula.
You can have a preference.
I've been quite fortunate. That's what my wife's told me. She said, we're going to make sure that this child, breastfeeds. We're going to, because she's seen the cost of formula and things, and so she's like, we're going to try everything we can to make sure we get there. So like, again, we're going to try as much as we can, but if it doesn't happen, then we got a budget for that, right?
Yeah, and something we haven't really touched on is clothing and nappies, right, during these two stages. And I think you've just had a baby shower and a nappy bra.
I organized a surprise baby shower, so we had that on Sunday. But yeah, as you say, nappies are expensive. So I've heard of this thing called a nappy bra, and so what's that? Guys love braing, and you just tell them, hey, bring some meats and bring some nappies, get 10 people to come. Nappies are what, 250 rand, 300 rand, packets, 10 people, that's 2.5, 3 grand you're saving. And a few months of nappies. Well, not a month, probably a couple of weeks, but
Weeks. Like 12 nappies a day, dude. Like every hour you're changing a nappy initially. So good luck.
But like that helps you get to get going. There's other things, obviously, like those a cloth nappy that you can be, obviously you can't use it as a newborn, but then you can get to cloth nappies. But then there's a thing of washing, and who's going to be cleaning them all the time. But that is another option that you can go. That's something we're keen to explore. But again, that'll be something we can't really understand or figure it out until we try it.
I think the from a budgeting perspective, we're at around 4,000 rand a month. If you add another 1,000 at least for nappies, it's not just nappies, it's wet wipes, it's cream, it's the babies, the bathing. I would say soap, but it's not soap. It's got to be whatever, because of the sensitivity of the skin. So these numbers add up, and I think this is where we're going with this, right? So we're at about 5,000 to 6,000 rand a month additional onto your budget, and you've relatively still got a newborn baby. This is excluding any sort of childcare, right? Any sort of nanny, or any of that, right? So that's, if you look at your budget now, that number needs to be there, or you need to understand where that number is going to come from, because there's one thing about putting your head in the sand about an extra 1,000 rand on your medical aid bill, but if you're looking at 6,000 rand pre-childcare, where is it going to come from? And I think that's the message, is we need to plan for it. Yes, kids are amazing and they bring so much joy once you're there, but if you don't have the funds, if you can't find that 6,000 rand every month, it's not going to be an enjoyable experience for anybody. And there's only so many trade-offs you can make. Unless your entertainment bill is 6,000 rand and you think you're never going out again, to take it out of entertainment, that's fine, right? There are those trade-offs that you will make, but I think it's just being aware of what those trade-offs potentially look like. So if we move to the next stage, Ben, so you've now got a baby. Let's say there's a nanny in your instance who's looking after your child. Your child is now grown up slightly, and they're a toddler, right? So say 3 to 4 years old. You've got 6,000 to 6,000 rand fixed recurring. Add the nanny in, maybe 10,000 rand fixed recurring. But now, right, your child needs some stimulation and engagement. Have you thought about that stage, Ben, and what that looks like?
And then there's like you say, you got to have a bit of, they got to learn some social skills, and they got to get out there and get to sort of say like a daycare, or preschool as they call them. There's got to be something, and that's a morning, and so that's another. Depends if you're going to go Monday to Friday. There's some that do Monday, Wednesday, Friday. But again, that's another cost. That's another 4 or 5 grand a month on preschool.
Yeah, so I think your sort of options are, if you've got a full-time carer, you don't necessarily need to send your child to school prior to grade R, which is at 5 years old, I think.
Like
So
they kept adding R's. There's like triple R's and 4 R's, and I don't know what you how you call them.
That's the thing, right? So our kids were at school from triple R, which is, I don't know, 3 years old. Actually, Sephora went to school. We didn't have a nanny or a family member to come in at home, so she went from like 2 years old to Redham, where her brother was. That was like, I don't even know, too many R's, like you say, but there's a cost. So it's either a nanny or it's a school cost that's coming in. But there could be an alternative. If you've got a nanny, there are like these other social clubs that you can take kids to, Clamber Club and nannies and babies, and for them to get engagement. It doesn't matter what you choose, but there's a cost, right? So there's a fixed cost. Your 6,000 rand is 10,000 rand. It's quickly 15,000 rand a month that you're incurring, and you haven't even sent your kids to a formal schooling system yet, right? And up until this point, those costs aren't overlapping. That is the number that you're looking at. And then we
Yeah,
enter.
it's quite scary when you start putting it out like that. But Mark, I just want to ask you, I mean, because it is quite like, you're hearing all these numbers, it's quite scary. And maybe, I mean, you're further down the line than us. I mean, do you think that people just sort of do make a way? Because I mean, I know we're looking at these numbers and they seem insane. But look how many people have kids, right? And people have made it through. And so maybe just on, while we're looking at this big number, I mean, you just throwing out 15 grand a month, before you even got to school. I mean, that just seems in our mind impossible, right? Like there's no way someone spending that. So like just from your experience, like how have you, did you have 15 grand in your budget before you had a child, or have you sort of had to make a way, like things have worked out, along the way?
Yeah, so I think there's no perfect solution which says, okay, I now have 15,000 rand surplus in my budget, now we can have kids. Like if you do that, you may wait forever, or maybe you're lucky enough and you do. But I think the idea is that it's you do make a plan, right? You make trade-offs, you make sacrifices along the way. But for me, it's just about being aware to say, okay, this is what's coming along. How are we going to fund it? Because there are multiple ways that you can fund it, right? So if you look at your respective careers, I think that's how we looked at it, to say, okay, what is my career trajectory and what is my earning ability along with my wife? How do these two roles that we play in a working world, where does that get us into the future? So my wife's a makeup artist, and her business got up and running again after Luke. So that brought in additional revenue. And then we started to apportion her income to say, okay, great, your earnings are going to cover things like schooling and childcare and that. And mine needs to cover the day-to-day living. Right. So I think for us, the way we dealt with it was to say, do we have the potential to keep earning more? Right. So will, in a few years' time, because it's not 15 from day one, is what we've highlighted. It was 1,500 before the baby, right? Then once the baby came in, it put on an extra, say, 5,000 into the budget. So it gradually increases, and we had to look and say, do we have that scope within our budgets to gradually increase it? And our answer was yes, right? But the concern is that, and once they start going to school, that increase becomes exponential, right? Because there are only a handful of options that government supplied options, which are relatively inexpensive. But then you do have the private option, which, as in most things in our country, we have this sense that we need to privatize everything in order for it to be of a decent standard. And so you look at that option, right? So before we get there, though, I just wanted to say, you do make a plan, right? But there is also only so much of a plan that you can make before you start having to make trade-offs, which are like, start to eat into your personal well-being. And I think that's the element that we want to remove, is to say, yes, 15,000 is a lot. It's not in the budget now. It could be in the budget, but we need to make active decisions, right? So like you and Manono, how does the career trajectory work? She's going on this path, and we need to allow her to do that, because this is what we want for one child. If we want to have another child, we're going to need that income, right? And maybe you guys make a decision to say, all right, my work is a bit more flexible, so I can help out with a few things here and there, which would then ease on the budget, right? So we don't have a full-time carer, we've got a half-day carer, because I could actually juggle my calendar around, that I could be present and assist with the childcare. Those are the sorts of trade-offs that you make, but they only happen through communication and by understanding what's coming, what's expected, as opposed to getting in that situation and now what, right? I think that's what we're trying to avoid, is the now what, because that leads to all sorts of not ideal things.
So Mark, when we're talking about the real cost of raising a child in South Africa, do you think like the real cost, I mean, obviously there is a financial, but like what you're saying really is that the real cost is that you got to have a great relationship or communication with your partner, and knowing exactly where you guys are going and how you're going to fund all of these things together. making a plan, basically.
I think it's going into it with your eyes open. So knowing, right? It's I always go back to this example. Everybody on Instagram or puts that picture of the 2 a.m. morning feed. It's just amazing, right? The 2 a.m. morning feed is not amazing. It's 2 a.m. in the morning, right? You want to be sleeping, your baby's crying. It's not amazing. And so raising a child isn't easy. It's not easy. Like communication is vital. Having a plan and understanding how you're going to do it is massively important. And that could be the cost, right? And the other side of it, Ben, is you may be doing this by yourself, right? There may not be another partner, which means you've got to incur all of this on your own, which is incredibly difficult. And then the cost is financial, right? How do you bear these things financially? There's no one to talk to about, there's no one to split these costs with. I think let's get into, Ben, for the last little bit that we've got left is the cost of education. Right. So up until now, you're kind of at around 5,000 to 10,000 on fixed expenses for kids. And now they move into the schooling system, like a formal schooling system, say grade 1 and up. I don't know what your plans are, Ben. When you guys talk about education, I'm hoping you're not going to say you haven't spoken about that yet.
No, it's interesting. I mean, it's a bit hard to also look at things, because it's still 6-7 years time. Like I have, like I said, our baby's due in 2 weeks. Obviously we have some plans, but we got some plans, and so we know that like we'd like to go to, ideally we'd like to go to a big nice private school. But I've also been talking to some friends, and they had this with their daughter. They're going into high school now, and they were looking around. So I think it depends where you live as well, because like they were telling us, like they were looking around, to go to the big fancy private school was 150,000 rand a year, and to go to the local government school was 50,000 rand a year. But when he looked at the difference between the two, one had a AstroTurf hockey field, and the other one also had AstroTurf. The other one had small class sizes, the other one. So, it was a government school, but was going to the private school worth an extra, 100,000 rand a year. So, like again, so there can be options. So he chose the government school, and then their daughter ended up getting scholarships, so they ended up going for free in the end. So that was awesome. But I mean, like, can you justify extra 100,000? Maybe you can, but again, at the massive cost that you've got to start putting away and budgeting for. I mean, 150,000 rand a year and that's just the school fees. Forget about the uniform and the overseas tour to New Zealand and this thing and that excursion overnight here. I mean, that's just the school fees.
I think we're not advocating that you have to send your kids to private school, because you don't, right? But you need to plan around it. When we were in Joburg, there are still good school options in Joburg, right? Government school options. The Afrikaans school system is traditionally really, really good, right? The education that the kids get there, the discipline, the sports, it's a good option. But you then need to live in an catchment area, right? Which is something you have to consider. We had that experience when we moved to Cape Town. We looked at sending Luke to one of the schools there in the southern suburbs. We lived on the Atlantic seaboard. We applied, and we duly got rejected straight away because we didn't live in the catchment area. So that there are some really good traditional Model C schooling options, but then you need to plan to live where they are. So we would have had to move to the southern suburbs, like within a 5-kilometer radius of the school, in order to be guaranteed acceptance. I had friends in Joburg who stayed in Bryanston, and there's a great option as well, but you've got to stay like across the road from the school, figuratively speaking, and that takes planning, right? So that says we're going to exercise this option, but we've got to live close, and then there's some trade-offs. Like for us in Cape Town, I didn't want to move from Greenpoint. I wanted to be there, which meant that I had to incur the private school fees. That was the trade-off and the conversation that Nicole and I had around this stage. So you could, like you say, send your kid to Model C option, but then you need to live close, and then potentially plan and decide if the education and you're not getting from it what you need to send them to the private option later in life. But I think it's understanding that the cost, does it fit now? Does it not fit now? Is it an option? Is it not an option? Private doesn't necessarily mean the best, like you say, right? The class sizes are similar, the facilities are similar. Traditionally, your Model C schools have a lot more history than your newer private schools, right? So the experience will be different, and private doesn't mean better. Right?
Exactly.
But now, let's say you are going to go the private route. One last scary thought here, right? So before we get, if you just take I wouldn't say average, maybe slightly higher than average high school option, we do a lot of education planning for our clients because it's prominent in their lives, right? If you look at one of the Curo schools or the Advotech schools, your primary schooling, which is potentially 10 years if you send your kids from like stage or age 4 or age 5, a little bit less, but you're looking at an average of around 90,000 Rand a year, right, for that phase. And then high schooling, you're looking at around an average of 150,000 Rand a year. That's a lot of money. And it's a big period of time. If you look at what you would pay over that entire period, that's in excess of 3 million Rand that you're going to pay for your kids' schooling, right? If you're going to go that route. Now we've had a conversation, you don't have to go that route, but if you are, it's something you've got to plan for, right? You can't get to grade 1 and say, okay, 90,000 Rand, that's like 7,000 to 8,000 Rand a month into the budget. The budget was sitting at 10,000 Rand. If you put 7,000 or 8,000 Rand in there, you're at 17,000, 18,000 Rand a month on school fees. Well, on running costs for your children, right? It's a big number.
Yeah, it's a scary number. And I think, again, it comes back to a bit of planning. Even putting away small amounts now can help to build up a bit of a lump sum. A lot of these schools also offer, the upfront discount. So if you pay the whole amount in January, for example, you can get 5, 7, 10% discount. That makes also a massive difference to how much you're actually paying. So, but again, like you said, you've got to have some sort of plan to have that, say, 100,000 at the beginning of the year to pay it, right? It's not going to just fall in your lap. So you got to make some provision to have it away, and then you can put that money away monthly to have it again, for the next year. But you've got to have that provision to make use of those discounts and pay cheaper fees.
And you almost need to build up a runway. You can't, unless you've got the ability to pay a lot more monthly when your child turns 4 or 5. But if you start sooner, right? So we advocate, like in your situation now, we would say, okay, great, you guys are pregnant. In your perfect world, what would your education system look like, right? And then we cost that down to the T, and we then tell you, okay, in order to make that provision. So in this example that I've given you, north of 3 million, you need to be saving around 9,000 Rand a month from day one, right? From now. That's what you should be putting away to fund your kids' education, given inflation and everything. And what that would then do, like you say, is it would help you to draw down upfront, right? And pay for the fees in advance, right? And then receive a discount. But it also gets you into the habit of saving. Importantly, a lot of companies traditionally sell education policies, right? So you engage with people and they think, oh, we've got education's covered, we've got a policy. Okay, how much do you contribute to 500 Rand a month? Okay, but what does that mean, right? So all the 500 Rand obviously is not going to get you anywhere near, and I think it's been sold as an education policy, which all it is, it's just an investment called an education policy that's then going to pay you what you've accumulated. That's all it is. We've got a question that's come up. I've heard of education funds offered by different financial institutions. Can you elaborate on what this is, what the advantages are? So traditionally, you used to get something called a Fundisa fund, which was offered by the government, and you could make contributions into that the government would then match at a certain level. I think the max was 600 Rand a year that they would contribute. And that's kind of what was available, but that scheme is no longer available. So I think in the context of the question is, the financial institution offer education funds. All an education fund is a fancy name for a savings vehicle, right? There's nothing else to it, right?
Well, it's a goal, right? So it's just an investment, but your goal, it's just a marketing, I guess, scheme. I was just saying, instead of opening an investment, open an investment specifically for an education fund. It would be the same as any other investment. It's not a fancy thing. There's no extra bells or whistles that come with it. It's just, but I think like what you said though is so important, that you got to cost it out, and like, what are you aiming towards? You can't just be putting 500 Rand in and hoping that, in 12 years time there's 3 million. You gotta work that out. You gotta sit down and do that calculation.
So I think the takeaway there is, do the calculation accurately. When we do it, we go to the school's website, we get the fees, we cost it over the period, and then it gives you an understanding as to how much you should be saving. The education fund would basically be selling an investment return, right? So, when we do these calculations, we have to make some assumptions on what the return would be. So it's an inflation plus 3 to 4% return, which is, not too aggressive, because it's education money. You don't want to be in a position where your fund is down when you need to draw on it. But that fund would then say, okay, great. So this risk profile means you should be in this sort of fund, for instance. And that's kind of my knowledge of any education fund. There's nothing specific that helps you in any other way other than you helping yourself to save for this expense.
So I want to just pick on one small point there, Mark. I mean, I know you said, if I'm going to send my child to the dream school and everything, I need to start paying 9 grand a month now, and I'm thinking, phew, I'm just, buying this pram and this and that, I don't have 9 grand to be putting away, right now for education. But I think the important thing is just to start, even if it isn't 9 grand, even if it's 2 grand, 2.5 grand, like you say, it's not going to match it, but it's not going to accomplish it, but at least it's a start. Later on you can start increasing it, you can get to a better position, but don't wait, because the power of compounding interest is going to make that money still grow over a period of time, and something is still going to be better than nothing.
Yeah, I think that's a really valid point, Ben, is do the calculation, understand what it needs to be, and get as close to it as you can, right? If that means 1,000, 2,000 or 9,000, what we tend to do is, once this plan is in motion, every year we revisit it and say, okay, so we should have been doing 9, we're doing 2. That means there's a 7 shortfall. And you're now aware of that, right? So it affects your spending patterns, it affects your saving patterns. And we can also take into account additional things. So when you get your bonus at the end of the year, you know that there's a 70,000 Rand shortfall on your education fund. It impacts what you do with it, right? So you then make a decision to say, am I going to top up the education fund? Or am I going to go spend it on Christmas? Whatever it is, right? You're making a decision because you're aware. And we bring in all aspects of your financial life in order to cater for these things, right? But then we have quickly hit the hour mark. So I just want to thank you so much for having this conversation with me. I really appreciate your insights as a new father to be, and I wish you all the happiness and 2 a.m. morning feeds that will bring you lots of joy, Ben, sitting there holding Manono's hand while you two go on this journey. I think the key message here is planning, right? We're not trying to scare you. It's going to cost what it's going to cost, but communicate with each other, understand what life looks like and figure out how you're going to fund it, because that's important, right? You can't get there, like you say, and say, oh gosh, now what are we going to do, right? And then you can't do the things you want to do. So from our side, if this has resonated with you, please reach out. This is the work we do with our clients, and we prioritize these sorts of things based on what's important to our clients. Yeah, and thank you so much for spending the time with us this morning. Ben, thank you again. I really appreciate it.
It's a pleasure, Mark. Have a good one.